Welcome to another episode of SpitBallin. I'm your host AJ, and alongside me, as always, is my co-host Christian. And on this episode of the show, we will talk about some of the major trades that have occurred in the last week in the NBA. A lot of superstars are headed to new destinations. We will also cover some NFL news that has occurred since the last episode. As we've said in previous episodes, though, the NFL news is slowing down, and basically every week slows down a little bit more, up until really the Hall of Fame game probably gets going, and then once preseason gets going, there'll be a lot more NFL news. But for now, it'll be mostly NBA coverage. And as always, you can listen to SpitBallin at most places you find podcasts, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. You can also find us on social media, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, under the handle at PodSpitBallin. That is at POD Spitballin. And jumping right into the NFL news that has happened since last episode. Last episode, Christian and I spent a lot of time talking about the situation of Terrion Arnold, as it is a developing situation for him and the NFL, and at the time, the Detroit Lions. Pretty much immediately after we stopped recording that last episode of the podcast, Terrion Arnold was cut from the Detroit Lions. And we were both in shock. It was a crazy alert to get, and especially right after we finished recording an episode, we knew that we would now cover it in this week's episode. And I still think it is a pretty big shock. Terrion Arnold, as we said in the previous episode, is innocent till proven guilty. Therefore, I am surprised that the Lions went and did cut him. Just because, realistically, if he is then innocent, you just cut a guy that you spent a first-round pick on not too long ago. And he has not been great for the Detroit Lions, nowhere near as good as he was supposed to be or could have been. But still, it's a guy that is kind of your number one corner, at worst your number two. And you were hoping was going to take that jump this year. And I actually believe he was going to take that jump this year. And then if he didn't, then that's a whole different situation. But due to his legal trouble, this is just becoming an unraveling situation for himself and his playing career. He did today, though, clear waivers officially. No team out of the 32 put in waiver for Terrion Arnold. Therefore, he is now free to sign with any team for any amount of money. And we'll have to see what ends up happening there. Supposedly, according to Adam Schefter and Ian Rappaport, there are teams that have expressed interest in bringing in Terrion Arnold. Now, I don't think we'll see a team sign him before any of this legal trouble and personal situation is figured out, because why would a team commit millions of dollars to somebody who then they'll possibly be cutting next week because now he may go to prison? Therefore, I just think this is definitely going to be a very interesting situation to watch develop and unfold for the rest of this NFL offseason. Christian, how do you feel about the Lions pretty much giving up on Terrion Arnold and believing what we've seen reported to be true? And what do you think the future will hold now for Terrion Arnold in the NFL?
It's the unfortunate circumstance in sports, especially when a situation like this comes up and Terrion Arnold, innocent until proven guilty. But unfortunately, this is bad press. This is bad news, and apparently the Lions just didn't want to deal with it. And I'm not shocked. He hasn't shown anything in the NFL to be extraordinary. And if that was the case, if he showed anything more than what he already was, the Lions probably hold on to him. But for a guy who hasn't panned out yet, I'm not gonna risk having him on my team with bad publicity, bad everything coming out in the media. And I think that's why no team is going to pick him up until this is at least resolved or something gets shown. And like you said, I don't think any team is going to be willing to even give him a good amount of money, to be honest. If he goes somewhere, it's going to be for even less than what his rookie deal was. So it should be interesting to see how at least this pans out. I don't know when the trial is. I know they're awaiting trial, and they're still trying to get an ankle monitor on him, which I'm pretty sure his team is like completely against, which I mean, I get, but if you're trying to prove yourself innocent, then you got to do whatever you do. So yeah, we'll see what happens.
We'll have to see how the situation unfolds for Terrion Arnold. For him, I do hope he is innocent. This would just be a very sad story to see such a young player in the league just immediately stripped of any possibility of being a legendary player in this league. And as you said, his court date is coming up. There is still no official trial date yet. They are still trying to schedule that date. And exactly as you said, it is because of that pending ankle monitor that they have not been able to agree, I guess, to put on him, which is very interesting. I feel like if a crime of this matter, it's kind of like you don't have a choice, but I guess me and you don't know the law as well as the people that do and have to handle the situation. So we'll have to see how that unfolds and when that'll even happen, because then the court date will be scheduled finally, I assume, once he gets that ankle monitor, and then I assume would be put on house arrest until the trial date is typically how cases like that go. But moving into some more positive news in the NFL and the last NFL news of this episode, Rasul Douglas is a Washington Commander now. He signs a 1-year veteran minimum type deal with the Washington Commanders. Rasul Douglas, a player who really was overlooked his whole career, got a shot in Green Bay finally, and really showed out when he got that shot, and now has made a career for himself, signed a pretty solid deal with the Buffalo Bills, but really just did not do so great for them in his time there. And then I do believe he played in Miami last season and just was nowhere near his form on the Packers, and at least in his first year with the Bills. And now he's heading to the Commanders, and the Commanders, it's a very interesting situation here, as the Commanders did trade for Marshawn Lattimore not too long ago, and they gave up not crazy compensation for him, but decent amount of compensation, and he is not even on the team anymore just due to regression and getting older. So to see them sign another veteran-type corner, obviously, though, his deal is cheaper than what Lattimore was being paid because they were still paying the contract that the Saints paid him. I do find it surprising that they would kind of go that route again and bring in another veteran corner like Rasul Douglas. But he is younger than Lattimore, and we'll have to see really how it pans out for Rasul Douglas in Washington. Christian, what do you think about Rasul Douglas heading to Washington? And do you think that this will help bolster up a secondary that definitely needs the help? Outside of Mikey Sainer still, that secondary really is not one of the best in the league.
I don't know if it will bolster, but it definitely helps with depth. Like you said, they don't have Marshawn Lattimore anymore. I don't even know how many games exactly he played. I don't remember ever seeing him in a Washington jersey, which is crazy to think about because they traded for him, I think, a year and a half, 2 years ago. I don't know the exact time. But it just adds competition, I'm pretty sure, for their other boundary corner right now is Ahkello Witherspoon. So they're probably going to be fighting for that cornerback 2 spot behind Mikey Sainer still. And I think the other corner is Trey Amos. You could say if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure that's right, but it just adds competition. So it should be, I don't know if it bolsters it, but I mean, he's reliable, so we'll see.
Yeah, and right now their corner room does look like Mikey Sainer still, Trey Amos, Ahkello Witherspoon, and Amik Robertson playing nickelback for them. So yeah, this is definitely just great depth for them, exactly, and we'll really have to see how this pans out for the Commanders. I do think it's a fine deal, though, to bring depth, as you said, and it's just a very much kind of veteran type of depth move. I don't think they're going to expect too much from Rasul Douglas, but hey, hopefully he does surprise them and then can give them a lot more than they were expecting. And that concludes the portion of NFL coverage for this week. As I said in the beginning, the NFL news is very slow once you get past the draft and free agency up until we get to that Hall of Fame game and then preseason. So we will always, as we say, cover the NFL first and foremost on this podcast. And then we will jump into now some NBA news. And the NBA, as we all know, a lot of people say the NBA offseason is typically better than the actual NBA season. There are always moves happening and players going to new places, but this offseason has definitely been one for the ages. Probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, offseason of turnaround in the sense of major players being dealt elsewhere. On the last episode of the podcast, we talked about Kawhi Leonard possibly being traded to the Toronto Raptors, and that occurred. We saw the rumors, wanted to address it, so we were first on it, and we got it right. Kawhi Leonard is headed to Toronto for Brandon Ingram and Grady Dick. Alongside the two players are 2 first-round picks, a pick swap, and 2 second-round picks. I think this is a phenomenal trade for the Raptors. They bring in Kawhi, who the last time he was there brought a championship to the franchise in 2019. Kawhi Leonard has also said that he would like to retire in Toronto and really sees this as his last NBA destination. He only wanted to go to Toronto, and that was the only place that he would sign an extension with. Other teams did have interest in him. However, they did not want to make the deal knowing that he would not sign a long-term contract extension. So it ends up being Toronto who gets Kawhi in a sweepstakes that really developed quickly. It was very similar to the LaMelo Ball trade where LaMelo Ball, more of never really you would think was going to get traded, and then the news came out, and then he got traded. Kawhi, there were rumors kind of circulating all before the draft, a little bit after the draft, but not that he was going to get dealt, just that there was a possibility. And then it came out that he wanted to go to the Raptors, and it happened. And he is now back in Toronto, and I think for the Raptors, you now have a very defensive team that really needed that last year. You had guys like Manuel Quigley and RJ Barrett who are not great defenders, and now you bring Kawhi Leonard to play alongside Scotty Barnes. I mean, that is a amazing defensive forward duo, and I truly believe Kawhi Leonard is the piece that this team needed. They made the trade for Brandon Ingram last season, and now Kawhi comes in and is just a better Brandon Ingram by a mile almost in everything. He's just a better scorer than Ingram and a better defender. And I do believe that they thought Brandon Ingram would play the role that Kawhi is going to play this year. And Kawhi, I believe, could take this team very far in the East. As the East, though, is bolstering up, we will dive into some of the other moves that went down in the East. But Christian, what is your opinion on this move by the Raptors to reacquire Kawhi Leonard? This is the second time that the franchise has traded for Kawhi Leonard.
It definitely makes the Raptors a contender now. He slides perfectly into that lineup. I remember saying last time that if I'm the Raptors, I would have only done it if I was giving up Brandon Ingram and not RJ Barrett. So I think RJ Barrett actually fits really well next to Kawhi. And this also comes down to the fact if Kawhi can even... I know last year, I don't know if he played a full season this year, but he's, at least in his time in LA, he has not been able to stay on the court. That wasn't the case when he was in Toronto, but that was when he was a 27-year-old. I think he's 35 now. So it's a cool turnaround story. I still want to know if this is still because of the Steve Ballmer incident. I don't know if that ever came out or if it will ever come out now that he's in Toronto. But that's big. And then when it comes to the Clippers, they get more first-round picks. They're just building capital for the future. Brandon Ingram slides next to Benedict Mathurin and Darius Garland. So the Clippers should still be somewhat competitive, but trading Kawhi, it's officially reset mode after getting rid of him and PG. So we'll see how the West shakes out. And then the East, I mean, the Raptors are back up top now. In my opinion, they're a top 3-4 team in the East.
Yeah, we'll have to see how it shakes out for the Clippers. And as you said, that situation with Steve Ballmer, it is very interesting if the aspiration money under the table thing was just a rumor or if it was actually true. But as we did talk about on last episode, him now being in a foreign nation to where the corruption or under the table payment was happening in America, technically there's no jurisdiction to go get Kawhi or even try him on it now. I'm not exactly sure how the law works on that, as we are just sport podcasters here, but this, as Christian just said, would be very big if that was kind of the reason why he almost forced his way back to Toronto, knowing that he'd kind of escaped that. So it'd be very interesting if that does develop and become a bigger situation. It would also suck for the Raptors if they kind of pulled off this awesome trade, bringing back the guy who won them their first finals, and then now it's kind of plagued by a whole legal thing. I don't think it will be, though. I think it would be talked about a lot more right now if there was a big truth to it. But we will have to see how that does shake out. And then, yeah, for the Clippers, we stated last episode what you said. For the Raptors, getting rid of Brandon Ingram is exactly what they wanted to do, and they did it. For the Clippers, I do think they definitely probably preferred getting younger talent like an RJ Barrett. But Brandon Ingram, as you said, fits in kind of perfectly, plays the role that Kawhi played there. It's two players that the swap was a perfect swap in a sense. Just one of the other players is a much better version of the other player. And now their lineup looks like Darius Garland. You can play Keaton Wagler at the 2, Benedict Mathurin at the 3, and Ingram at the 4. I don't think Ingram's really big enough or like a great defender enough to play the 4. So we're going to have to really kind of see how that shakes out. This could be Keaton Wagler coming off the bench maybe in the beginning. But exactly, the Clippers get more picks. They don't lose an immense talent and get nothing player-wise back in return. Brandon Ingram is still a solid talent in the NBA. He is a good three-point shooter, a good scorer. So I do think that this will be good for the Clippers during this kind of rebuild stage. But as Christian said, this is it on the Kawhi, Paul George era in LA. I will always remember the famous clip of Patrick Beverley saying I don't think he was saying it to Steph Curry directly, but I think it was on a podcast or something, and he was saying it to Steph Curry through video. Basically, this is our era now. Like, you had the last 10 years, it's my 10 years now. And it's crazy to look at now that Patrick Beverley is out of the league. And Kawhi Leonard and Paul George are no longer Los Angeles Clippers. It was definitely a failed experiment for the Clippers, and we'll have to see if they could ever really get back to competing since the Blake. I mean, they did make the playoffs a couple times with that core, but they didn't really get far in it. The last time they were a very good team was definitely the Blake Griffin, Chris Paul, DeAndre Jordan, Lob City era. So we'll have to see if they can get back to that, hopefully quicker rather than later. But moving now to the other trade that happened out west, the Memphis Grizzlies send Ja Morant to the Portland Trailblazers for Jeremiah Grant and Chris Murray. Now, this is a trade that a lot of people kind of thought Ja was going to just stay on the Grizzlies because there weren't really any rumors about him getting traded or even demanding a trade. And then it got brought up that it just wouldn't make sense for him to stay in Memphis. They traded away Jaren Jackson. They traded away Dillon Brooks. They got rid of Desmond Bane. That whole core is gone. And now he's the older one out of that core. He's very young still, but in the sense of where the Grizzlies are going, he was now the veteran of the team. And Ja Morant, out of all those players, probably the most exciting player to watch at least play basketball. I'm not going to say the best player, as Jaren Jackson does have a Defensive Player of the Year, and also as a defender is very good, and he's also a good scorer. But at least in my personal opinion, I would put Ja Morant above Jaren Jackson. He ends up getting traded, though, for the least amount, pretty much, when you look at just what the compensation was. They get a basically salary matcher in Jeremiah Grant, which was just to match the salaries of Ja and Jeremiah to get the trade basically to go through. And then they get Chris Murray, who's a young talent that really hasn't been great for the Blazers. And maybe the Grizzlies hope that they can rehabilitate him and make him good. And this is just a kind of a sad end to an era, almost like the Clippers. This was a team that was very exciting to watch for a while and kind of had that bad boy Pistons vibe to them. And then we just kind of saw them each get sent out the door one by one, and now the final and biggest domino falls. However, for the Blazers, I love this. The Blazers get Ja Morant now to play alongside Denny Avdija, Donovan Clingan, Scoot Henderson, Shaedon Sharpe. They still have Drew Holiday, Damian Lillard. I do believe the Blazers are not done, though, and we will see either Drew Holiday, Dame, or Scoot be moved. That is just a lot of money towards one position, and just they all can't play. It's just impossible to have all those guys play in a game. So we'll have to see what ends up happening there. A lot of people do think Drew Holiday could end up in a buyout situation, which then would put him as a pretty big free agent, and I think a lot of teams would be interested in getting the two-time champion defensive point guard on their team, and I think it would be a lot of contenders looking to sign for a vet minimum. But for the Blazers, this is a big step in getting back to what the team was when Damian Lillard was in his prime. I think the Blazers are going to be very exciting to watch next year. Denny Avdija made his first All-Star game last year and really showed that he can be a good NBA player after being dealt to Portland in the trade from when he was in Washington. He has now proven that he is an All-Star and can be hopefully the face of their franchise, and now has a running mate in Ja Morant. So I do really like this for the Blazers and think that this makes their team very interesting for next year and very competitive. I do believe the Blazers will be a team to watch next year. And for the Grizzlies, as we said with the Clippers, it's just kind of a sad end to a failed era, but a very promising, hopeful future, as Jeremiah Grant is an expiring contract. They have young pieces like Cedric Howard and Zach Edey. They just drafted Cameron Boozer. So I do believe that the Grizzlies will be back sooner rather than later, as I said with the Clippers. And it'll be very exciting to watch that young core now develop and be able to be the franchise now instead of having to be behind Ja Morant. And Christian, what do you think about Ja Morant heading to the Blazers, getting dealt there, and now the Grizzlies kind of having to move on from that whole era that we saw unfold the last 5 to, I'd say, 6 years?
Yeah, I was a little shocked. I expected it. Well, I'll first say I expected him to get traded for at least. I thought there was a little more value for him. I didn't realize that teams at least didn't have that much value in general, since basically the trade was they just swapped him for Jeremy Grant, and then the Grizzlies were like, here, take Chris Murray. And this basically ends the core three in Memphis. So Bane, Morant, Jaren Jackson, they're all gone now. So Memphis is in full restart mode. But like you said, they just had the second overall pick with Boozer, or third. He got drafted third, I believe. They should be fine for the future. They have some pieces. Cedric Howard. And for the Grizzlies, I mean, it just came down to the fact that Ja rose to stardom very quickly in the NBA. It all started at Murray State, went to Memphis, rose to stardom very quickly, and then off the court issues started happening. And then once the off the court issues started happening, injuries started happening. And when the injuries started happening, his play declined, at least this past season, very heavily. I know he had an elbow injury. He was out for most of the year. But in 20 games, he only shot 41%. That's not what the Grizzlies, at least, are looking for out of their star player, especially when at some point in every single year, it looked like there was always something going on off screen, which is not what you want as a franchise, and that's not what you want leading your franchise. But when it comes to the Trailblazers, I like the move strictly because you can argue they have too many guards, but Drew Holiday, very old. I doubt he stays in the team for much longer, even though I think he would be a better backcourt mate with him, Scoot, and Ja rather than Dame. But Dame's a legend there, and they're not just going to get rid of him again for no reason. But Dame's aging, Drew Holiday's aging. I don't think they believe Scoot is their future point guard. I really don't, and he hasn't really shown anything to prove that. So they're kind of hoping that Ja can step in there, because they do have what were they, 8th last year? I mean, they do have a chance to at least contend a little bit. They have Donovan Clingan, who's one of the best rising centers in basketball. They have Tumani Kumara, who's an amazing 3-and-D 4. Like you said, they have Denny Advia, which we'll see if he still keeps the same form because there wasn't much besides him in Portland last year. They have Shaedon Sharpe. They have a lot of young pieces and they went after Ja Morant, which is basically a buy low. And they're both taking a risk here, and we'll see how it pans out. But I like it for Portland, and for Grizzlies, I like it as well. So they're both the Grizzlies are rebuilding, Trailblazers are trying to get to the next level.
And the Blazers were a 7 seed last year. I said an 8 seed, so very similar. They got out of the play-in and ended up versing the Spurs in the first round, where they did take a game against the Spurs. It was a 4-1 series. And exactly, now they have Ja Morant, so I do think they will create some more noise, and as you said, we will have to see if Denny Avdia with Ja Morant now on the court could still produce as much as he did, because, as you said, there was really nobody else to score on that team outside of him, so now that Ja's there, he will be taking some points away from Denny, but hopefully not too much, and we'll have to see how that shakes out for both teams in the West, but heading back east, probably the biggest shock trade so far of this NBA offseason is the Philadelphia 76ers and Boston Celtics have agreed to a trade that sends Jaylen Brown to the 76ers in exchange for Paul George, 2 first-round picks, and 2 second-round picks. Now, this trade, this is going to be a bit of a long kind of, you got to follow with me here to understand what I'm saying. This trade is just a disaster class, I believe, by a front office and management of the Boston Celtics. This trade would have never occurred if Giannis Antetokounmpo was not available for trade. This all goes back to when the Bucks officially finally put Giannis on the market and the Miami Heat were the front runners. Everybody believed he was going to the Heat. Giannis does end up going to the Heat, and we'll dive into that trade becoming official today a little bit later in the episode. But it was Giannis to the Heat pretty much the whole way. There were some rumors that maybe the Blazers would be involved because Drew Holiday and Giannis have history. And then the Celtics, I believe, thought, you know what? Jaylen Brown, we don't like how he's kind of, trying to be the face of the team now. That's Tatum. We don't like how he goes on his live streams after games on Twitch and kind of calls out his teammates and is saying stuff about the organization. So they thought, let's go get Giannis and include Jaylen Brown in that trade package. Ultimately, the Celtics failed at that. They did not acquire Giannis, and he ends up on the Miami Heat. But because of this, Jaylen Brown now, who I truly believe would have been in a Boston Celtics uniform to start the 2026-27 NBA season next year, if then we saw all reported by Shams that Jaylen Brown was in the package for Giannis. And now, for a player who, there were always rumors after they got eliminated from the playoffs by the 76ers that he kind of wanted his own team. There was a possible Atlanta rumor that he'd go play in Atlanta, go back to where he's from, that'd be his own team, and that he kind of was upset being in the shadow of Tatum for so long. And also, especially that he played so well this year and even was 6th in MVP voting at the end of the season. But I still truly believe that he wouldn't have been dealt, that he would have ended up staying on the team, and we would have seen that Tatum-Brown duo again, at least for one more season. Then, once it was publicly out there that he was included in a trade package, this gives Jaylen Brown all the ammunition to just demand out now and say, sorry, you clearly don't believe in me as much as you believed in Giannis, and I don't want to play for you anymore. I want out, and simple as that. I don't want to be a Boston Celtic anymore. And now when this happens, everybody in the league knows this now. So the Boston Celtics, kind of like what happened with the Grizzlies and Ja Morant, have no pull really on any team now. There were rumors after the trade was completed with 76ers, and then confirmed rumors that they originally were asking for VJ Edgecombe to be in the deal. They still would have, I think, ended up getting Paul George, because to make the money match, they did need a sizable contract like Paul George's. But they were asking for VJ, Paul George, and I think it was 5 first-round picks. Christian, correct me if I'm wrong. But they were asking for a boatload more than what they got. And the 76ers said, no, sorry. Deal with your disgruntled player then. We don't want that deal. And I think day by day, they knew Jaylen Brown was going to maybe sit out, was going to demand out, and then that would have been even worse if he publicly demanded out, because it all kind of happened behind the curtain, behind the shadows. Nothing was publicly said by the Celtics or Brown. And then it happened. Jaylen Brown was sent to the team that sent his old team home after they blew a 3-1 lead to them in the NBA playoffs last year. That is also the thing I really can't fathom by the Boston Celtics. The Celtics sent Jaylen Brown to a team in the East. And in basketball, obviously, and football, divisions are very important and determine a lot of things in the playoffs. There are divisions in basketball, though, and they don't matter as much. But the thing that they do matter for is if you're in the same division and conference as a team, you play them 4 times a year instead of 3 times a year if you are in the same conference and not same division. The 76ers and Boston Celtics are in the same division. So now you not only kept him in your conference, you now also will be playing 4 games against him instead of if you traded him to another team in the East that wasn't in your division, you'd play 3 games. So now Jaylen Brown will always have a target and have that date circled on the Celtics when he plays them 4 times a year, while either it's in Boston or Philly. Obviously, I think the Boston game he'll be a lot more ready to go for too, as that will be the main revenge. Getting a win against them back in Boston is definitely what he has his sights set on. But as I stated in the beginning of this long kind of explanation, this was just a disaster class, I believe, by management and by Brad Stevens, by the Boston Celtics, because you had a superstar level player on your team that got traded for. I look at it as a Celtics fan, you have to look at it as at least they got 2 first-round picks, because realistically, they could have not gotten that. So they get Paul George, who hopefully, he looked kind of decent down the stretch this year after he came back from his PED suspension, but he's not Jaylen Brown. He's a lot older than Jaylen Brown. But they at least got 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks, so they didn't get nothing, at least pick value-wise, for Jaylen Brown. But this trade package could have been way better, I believe, to any other team if it wasn't known he was disgruntled and ready to go. Christian, what do you think about this trade for both teams? I think I'll dive in after you speak about the trade to the 76ers, but I think this is great for the 76ers. And for the Celtics, Paul George comes in and will play the Jaylen Brown type role, and maybe we'll see Tatum now look like an MVP possibly, because he'll have to score a lot more, I believe. But I just think this was a disaster class by the Boston Celtics.
I'm not gonna speak more towards, because I don't know exactly what the situation was beforehand. I know you brought it up before. Why exactly he was brought up in the Giannis trade talks? I don't know exactly what happened behind the scene, like you said, live streams and all that stuff. He should have never been engaged in trade talks in the first place. He's been arguably there's been debate during their entire Celtics tenure of who actually has been the better Celtic, and you bring it down to stats and metrics, and at least playoffs wise, Jaylen Brown's always been the better player than Jason Tatum. On their finals run, Jason Tatum wasn't the finals MVP, it was Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown shot 52% during that playoffs run. Jason Tatum shot 42% that playoff run. Not knocking Jason Tatum at all, but when you look at Boston, and they're always competitive when those two are on the court and healthy. Obviously, this past season, Jason Tatum wasn't healthy, So it wasn't fair to say that Jaylen Brown was completely carrying the team, because he was. Like you said, he was 6th in MVP voting. Jason Tatum's only ever been 4th in MVP voting. I know it's higher, but still. Jaylen Brown's been a higher volume shooter, higher percentage shooter than Jason Tatum. And now we get to see what Jason Tatum really is, completely by himself. We saw what Jaylen Brown was this year by himself, and he basically carried Boston to, was it the second round they played Philly? Obviously they blew that lead, but now we see what Jason Tatum, and we'll completely see if what Brad Stevens did is completely wrong, which I think completely was. And it's not even the fact that they're trading Jaylen Brown. They traded him to one of their main rivals in the East, in the 76ers. You're making the 76ers a billion times better with this trade. Him and PG, basically, it's the same contracts. They basically both match, but I'm pretty sure Jaylen Brown has 1 extra year on the contract compared to PJ. And now you gave the 76ers, basically, if Joel Embiid stays healthy, an onslaught of a starting 5. And now you have to compete with that, and now you have PG, who has been steadily declining and injury prone the past few years. And now you have Jason Tatum, who's coming off a torn ACL or a torn Achilles. It's one or the other. And he didn't even play that well last year. He shot 41% in the 20 games he played. Logically, it does not make any sense at all that Jaylen Brown would have ever been in any trade talk. And even more logically, to even send him to a rival, like you said, it's a divisional rival, not even a conference rival. So they play them 4 times a year. And they're probably going to have to play them in the playoffs. So I think this is, at least from a team like Boston, who has shown to be a very smart organization, I don't think this was smart by any means, and I think Philly is very happy with what they got, especially giving up 2 first-round picks and getting rid of PG's contract.
Yeah, exactly. I also believe that's something I didn't even touch on talking about the trade foremost, that contract is probably one of the worst we've seen in recent NBA history, and the Sixers just got off it, and not even got off it in the sense of, oh, they salary dumped, and Paul George is still, like, as you said, an okay player, but he's getting older, he's injury prone, and they got 2 second-round picks maybe and salary dumped into a team like the Brooklyn Nets that could absorb a contract like that. No, they basically salary dumped PG with 2 first-round picks and got Jaylen Brown back. That is just, as you said, just crazy to think that he was even in trade talks, and that the fact that, as I said before, this all really starts because the Celtics thought that they could outdo another NBA team like the Miami Heat and go get Giannis. They failed, and this ultimately led to the ugly divorce we saw between the Boston Celtics and Jaylen Brown. Now, though, moving on to the Sixers, as Christian touched on there, the Sixers look amazing now. They have Tyrese Maxey, a young VJ Edgecombe, Jaylen Brown, and Joel Embiid. There's rumors that LeBron James may want to go play in Philly. We saw that weird kind of vision board, you could call it, that Rich Paul showed on his podcast with Max Kellerman, kind of pointing out the destinations that LeBron would go to and the players there. The Sixers were a team that was talked about a lot, and there was some ties there between LeBron and the GM. The GM's brother played with LeBron in high school. So some interesting ties if that were to occur. The Phillies would be insane to even think about that. Their starting 5 then would be Tyrese Maxey, VJ, Jaylen Brown, LeBron, and then Joel Embiid. That would be an insane starting 5. They also have pretty good depth. They, made some interesting signings so far in the NBA offseason. I don't think they're such outlandish signings either. They got a lot of guys on small contracts. We did see them lose Quentin Grimes, however, though, to the Los Angeles Lakers. But we see the 76ers bring in some guards to replace him, and I'm trying to get that information up quickly for you guys, the viewers. And let's see. They got, LeBaron Fallone in the draft, who I think is a good, solid backup point guard, backup shooting guard, however you want to use him. They get Anfernee Simons, who was a major commodity on the guard market, to back up Maxey. And then they also get Dean Wade, and that's just like a solid kind of 4 that's good at defense. He's nothing special, but he's a pretty good defender and can score when you need him to. So the 76ers are looking very good, and if they add LeBron to this roster, I mean, as Christian said, the Celtics just made a super team in their own conference and their own division. It'll be very interesting to see how this shakes out for them. Obviously, as of now, they don't have LeBron. So Dean Wade, I guess, would be starting at the 4 for them, which would be their weak position. But I don't even think it'll be that weak having Embiid, Edgecombe, Maxey, and Jaylen Brown
He doesn't
surrounding
have
him.
to do much.
Exactly. He just has to play his role and play defense, which role players, you look at a guy like Josh Hart, has done that his whole career and is now an NBA champion with the New York Knicks. So we'll have to see how this shakes out for both sides. I do believe the Sixers definitely won this trade by a landslide and will probably be the better team. And as Christian said, we'll have to see if Tatum is the guy for the Celtics this year. It'll be very interesting to see if it was all kind of he's great because there was a guy that had to get double team next to him sometimes, and now he's all alone and he's not as great as he was. So we'll have to see how that situation shakes out. And moving on to the last bit of NBA news that I touched on briefly there for a second, LeBron James. He is still yet to be signed. The 76ers are a possible destination, they're saying. The real contending destinations, though, I believe, still are Miami, Cleveland, and Golden State. We touched on this on the last episode a little bit, so we're not going to repeat ourselves here as it's pretty much the same information still. But the only new information is that Rich Paul went on his podcast and kind of talked about each destination and why he would want to go back there. Cleveland had a minus next to it now that Darius Garland wasn't there. I guess Rich Paul and LeBron really like Darius Garland. Maybe the Clippers will be a surprise team in this sweepstakes if he likes them that much. I doubt it, but Cleveland would be the homecoming, would be the king returns after winning the finals for them in 2018. He is currently in Cleveland, LeBron. There's been sightings of him at local bars the last couple weeks that people think that he's just enjoying his offseason in Cleveland as his family is there. So I don't think that's so much to read into. But it is the city he's currently in, so you never know. And realistically, I do think it will end up being Miami or the 76ers, purely because the 76ers, as I just said, that would be a monster starting 5. It's not even close. No starting 5 in the league compares to that starting 5. You could say the Knicks, because I would say they have one of the best starting 5s as a complete team, but still, it's not as good as that Sixers possible starting 5. If he goes to Miami, same thing. I think Miami then, it's not nearly as good as the Sixers would be, but now you have Davion Mitchell, Andrew Wiggins, LeBron James, Giannis, and Bam. That is a ridiculous starting 5 and would just make a lot of sense. The Warriors, it looked like that was the team in the lead for a while. We even saw Draymond Green decline his player option, which a lot of people were like, oh wow, like this is happening. He's going to Golden State because Draymond just cleared up the money that he would have been taking up if he accepted his player option. However, it didn't happen as quick as people thought it was going to happen. And realistically, looking at their roster, it's just not nearly as good as the Sixers or as the Heat or even as Cleveland. So I really would be surprised if it ends up being the Warriors. If it is the Warriors, it is purely just nostalgic and excitement, I think, of seeing Curry and LeBron play together. But I do believe if I had to make a pick right now, that honestly, I think it will be Miami. I don't think it'll be Philly purely because I feel like LeBron adding another team to his NBA tenure just doesn't look great. Adding another team just kind of then when you look at LeBron's career, he went from team to team. And hey, if he wins a championship in Philly, then he went to team and won a championship for all of them. But I just don't think you want to go to 4 teams in your career if I'm LeBron. But we'll see if he does choose that. And then Cleveland, I don't think it makes sense for him to go back to Cleveland. I touched on it last episode as if he goes back to Cleveland and comes up of anything short of a finals, I think it'll just be looked at as disappointing. Where Miami or even the Warriors or even Philly, if he goes to one of those teams, it'll just be exciting. And any fan of those teams will just be so excited to have him and whatever he does. Where Cleveland, I think if he doesn't win, it'll be looked at as disappointing and a waste of time. So we'll have to see where LeBron ends up deciding to go. Christian, what do you think about this Sixers team now heading into the season with the core 4 that they have currently? And then what do you think about LeBron possibly joining that core 4 and making it a extremely powerful starting 5? And where do you think he'll possibly go if it isn't Philly?
For the Sixers, I think it all comes down to health, really. I think it's if Joel Embiid can stay on the floor, I believe this team can completely just dominate the East. I feel like they can beat most teams with that roster, especially if they get LeBron. That I don't think any team's beating them in the East. If I'm being, I think we can just say they're finals bound. That's how good they are. I think on paper, but that all comes crumbling down if Joel Embiid gets hurt. Because unfortunately, with all the scoring, with all the high volume they have at the In the backcourt, fortunately, the front court without Joel Embiid is very weak. So it should be interesting to see how that goes, but I do see them being a very good team regardless. I just don't know how far they will get without Embiid, which is always the question mark if he can stay on the floor or not. And then LeBron, like you said, I don't think Cleveland is a smart way to go. I have the same reasons as you. I think I don't think it fully tarnishes what he did going back there in the first place, but Cleveland, it's the way sports fans are. I think fans will be looking like it's like, wow, you came back and you couldn't win another one. It's just it's at that point, I would just go to a team. I would if I'm him and I want to win a chip, I'm going to Philly. I'm going to Philly, and I don't look at it as he's going to a team to like trying to just get his own, like, just get another chip, because unfortunately LeBron is still playing at elite level. I'd understand if he was averaging like 10 or like 12 and he's like, okay, I want to just go to a team because I'm not good enough anymore. He's still very much good enough to be a second or third option on a team. I just don't think he can be the first anymore. So I would go to Philly. Miami makes a lot of sense for him. He'd be the main ball handler with Davion Mitchell playing the two and just mainly playing defense. And then you have Giannis and Bam. But I think it's going to come down to them two. Timberwolves are also in the mix. I don't know how heavily favored they are, but I know they're in the mix now, and I know Ant is probably heavily recruiting him. So my guess, I'll say, you know what? I'll say Miami, because I believe that Pat Riley is going to lure him back for a second time.
We'll have to see if we were both correct on our LeBron predictions, if he is going to head back to Miami for a second time, and if Pat Riley does pull this off for Miami, this would probably be one of the greatest off seasons I think we've ever seen a GM have, or a president of basketball operations, his title in Miami. He acquires Giannis and LeBron in one off season. That would be pretty wild for the Miami Heat. So we'll have to see how the LeBron sweepstakes ends up shaking out. And exactly, the Minnesota Timberwolves could end up being a dark horse team in this race. And rounding out our NBA news coverage, a not big story, because I think he has kind of regressed in the last couple of years in Sacramento, but DeMar DeRozan does hit free agency. He is waived by the Kings today, and they kind of worked out a deal where they were trying to trade him, and then he was also trying to buy out, but I think just kind of good faith more, they waived him, where then they were stretching his contract, so it's not going to be like on the books like that much, and I think they also paid him a little bit more earlier, it seemed like. So it was kind of like a good faith waive where he is now a free agent, but he isn't costing them a crap ton of money like the Bucks are getting now with Damian Lillard after they waived him after his tenure was over in Milwaukee. So let's see where DeMar DeRozan ends up landing. The Heat, I feel like, are in rumors always for a player that gets released and kind of has somewhat of a big name. They are in the rumors right now for DeMar DeRozan, as they were linked to him in previous seasons when he was available before heading to Sacramento. Christian, what do you think about DeMar DeRozan leaving the Kings, and where do you think he'll end up next? If it is Miami or another team, I don't think it'll be Miami. I think DeMar DeRozan probably ends up going to a different, maybe bigger for sure contender, as there are still some question marks with Miami, and I could also see him staying out west because he is from California. So
yeah, DeMar DeRozan, it's kind of crazy with how old he is. I remember at least drafting him in fantasy one year, and he was always a stud for me. But he's gotten worse year after year. His efficiency is still there, though. He's still shooting 49% from the field. Unfortunately, he doesn't move the way he used to. He's not going to be a premier player for any team that's going to want him anymore. I'm seeing top suitors as the Lakers, Miami, Clippers, Raptors. The only team he'd have heavily minutes on is probably Miami, because he can slide in probably as a reserve wing. And then for the Lakers and Clippers, he'd also be a reserve wing, but they have more wing help. And I think the Lakers are still heavily trying to get after Jonathan Kuminga. So if they can't get Kuminga, DeRozan's probably on their radar as well, but I expect him to be picked up sooner rather than later.
Yeah, we'll have to see how that ends up shaking out. It is a bit of a sweepstakes, as it is a older but used to be premier player now hitting free agency. The Warriors also linked to him a little bit possibly, and we'll have to see if that ends up coming to fruition. And now, rounding out this episode of the podcast, we're going to end it here with one of our games that we play sometimes in later parts of episodes. Christian here is going to name the last 20 NBA MVPs starting in 2006.
Okay, well, the beginning might be a little rocky, so sticking with me. Should get better as we go. '06, It's literally Garnett, Nash, Dirk, Kobe. I don't think LeBron started. I think once I get to LeBron in '08, I think I can get it going. But I'm my first guess. I'll say is Kobe.
Kobe was '08.
All right. So wait. So the year.
So
So
you have the
it's
years like a little like out of order by like one, basically.
oh okay okay. So okay. All right. So then it's Nash.
Nash in
Okay,
2006.
because then it's Dirk after him. Dirk
Yep.
was. Wait, is this '06, '07? What year is this?
So it's 2006 with Steve Nash. I don't know if that
Okay.
was like
Okay.
the 2005 season that then concluded in '06. And they're
And then
kind of
Dirk
mad
was
at that.
'07.
Dirk
Kobe's
was
'08.
'07. Kobe '08.
And then it's LeBron '09, '10. Or
Yep.
10, yeah. In between LeBron was D Rose.
Mm-hmm.
And it's LeBron again.
Yep.
I'm also gonna rant real quick. LeBron, I'm gonna be naming a few players, should have like 8 MVPs, but after LeBron was KD.
Yep.
After KD, oh my God, was Russ before Curry or after Curry? I think. Oh no, because KD went to the Warriors, so it's Steph.
Yep. 15, 16 Steph.
All right, did Harden win before him? See, I'm not as tone when it comes to football. I'll say Harden.
Harden was in 2018.
Okay, so it's Russ and then Harden. Sick. Okay.
Russ in 17, Harden in 18.
And then 1920, it's Giannis.
Giannis in 1920.
After it's Jokic.
Jokic in 21.
Did Jokic repeat?
Jokic in 22. He did repeat.
Oh, okay. And then he didn't get the. Oh my God, what year is this? 23.
2023.
So SGA is 26, 25. So Embiid.
I'm about to say, it was a player we were just talking about. Yes, Embiid got that kind of controversial MVP in 2023.
Who got it right before Shea? Wait.
This was the reason why it was controversial. The guy who then won it after Embiid. It was kind of like the LeBron D Rose situation in a sense that people thought that.
Oh, Jokic, because he should have
Yeah.
fourth-seeded.
Yep, Jokic got it
And
in
then
24
it's
again.
Shea.
And then Shea. And I think then we'll see this year another new MVP because the NBA really does not like having 3-time to 4-time MVPs in a row. So
Yeah,
I
that's a good
think we
point.
will see somebody new this year.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That was really good. I also kind of didn't realize, though, pretty much if you get those first couple, the Nash, Dirk, Kobe, then you just kind of have to know like where the repeats happened and the couple players in between it because then it's just pretty much the same players a bunch of times.
Those are like the blurry years.
Yeah, yep. But that is going to do it for us on this episode of SpitBallin. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of the podcast. Hopefully, there will be some more NFL news as we head into next week's episode. But as always, we will keep you updated with the NBA news as we are in the NFL offseason. And as always, Christian is going to leave you with one last spitball.
I said it before. LeBron's going back to South Beach.
We will see if that spitball comes to fruition and LeBron is back in Miami. As always, you can listen to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. You can also find us on social media on Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok under the handle @PodSpitBallin. And as always, keep spitballing, everyone.